Elijah was a prophet who, despite performing some of the Bible's most remarkable miracles, faced profound discouragement and exhaustion. Picture a man who single-handedly challenged Baal worship in ancient Israel and called down fire from heaven. Yet, even someone as devout as Elijah wasn't immune to feeling overwhelmed and defeated. After the dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel, where Elijah showcased God's power in a spectacular display, he found himself running for his life. Queen Jezebel, furious over the defeat of her prophets, vowed to kill Elijah. The Bible recounts her threat in 1 Kings 19:2. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." Fearing for his life, Elijah fled south to Beersheba, abandoning his servant there as he sought refuge. Jezebel's fury wasn't just about her prophets' deaths, but also her rejection of the God Elijah had glorified. Despite the miraculous evidence of God's power, Jezebel remained defiant. Her response highlighted a dangerous blind faith and the importance of critical thinking. Elijah had hoped the miraculous events on Mount Carmel would lead to widespread conversion, but when this didn't happen, he was left deeply disheartened. 1 Kings 19:3 tells us, "When he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there." The question arises whether Elijah's escape was divinely guided. While God protected him, it's uncertain if the divine intention was to safeguard Elijah in Jezreel or to move him away from there. Traveling roughly 130 kilometers south to Beersheba, Elijah sought safety from what he perceived as imminent danger. Elijah's story reveals that even the strongest and most courageous can falter. In the Bible, wisdom and bravery do not always prevent moments of weakness. Moses, known for his meekness, spoke rashly. Abraham, the epitome of faith, struggled with patience. And Elijah, the bravest of prophets, fled from an angry queen. We read of his despair in 1 Kings 19:4. "But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die, and said, 'It is enough now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers.'" In his retreat, Elijah even further isolated himself, lamenting under a broom tree. This powerful man who had once prayed to stop and then restart the rain, now prayed for his own death. Thankfully, God did not grant this request. Sometimes hearing no from God can be a blessing, as it was in Elijah's case. Elijah's feelings of failure and self-doubt, despite his monumental achievements, remind us that even the most dedicated individuals can experience moments of crisis. His hope that Mount Carmel would lead to a national revival was dashed, leaving him feeling ineffective and unworthy. He blamed himself, questioning his worthiness and effectiveness in his mission. Elijah's story underscores the reality that even with undeniable evidence, people may still choose to reject the divine truth, and self-doubt can creep in even after great victories. The surprising truth about Elijah's struggles and God's provision. It's a common misconception that prophets are immune to discouragement, but Elijah's story reveals that even the most faithful can face tough times. When Elijah hit rock bottom, God didn't abandon him. Instead, the Lord stepped in to uplift him, providing him with a new ally in the prophet Elisha and eventually taking him to heaven in a whirlwind. God truly took care of Elijah. Physical needs in 1 Kings 19:5-8. After collapsing under a tree from exhaustion, Elijah was awakened by an angel who told him, "Get up and eat." To his surprise, there was freshly baked bread and a jar of water waiting for him. He ate, drank, and fell asleep again. The angel returned, touched him, and urged him to eat once more, saying, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you." With renewed strength from this miraculous provision, Elijah traveled 40 days and nights to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. This episode shows how God meets our physical needs as part of his care. Elijah was provided with rest and sustenance, which were essential before he could tackle his spiritual challenges. Sometimes taking care of our physical well-being is crucial, especially when we're spiritually drained. Just as Elijah needed physical nourishment to continue his journey, so do we. Rest and nourishment for the weary. Today, many people find themselves in a place similar to Elijah's, overwhelmed and seeking relief from burdens. In 1 Kings 19:6-7, Elijah received both rest and nourishment from God. God's response wasn't just a quick fix. He repeatedly provided Elijah with food and rest, recognizing that Elijah needed more than a single meal to overcome his fear and despair. This emphasizes that while spiritual nourishment is important, physical needs like rest and proper food are equally vital for those who are feeling down. God's gentle care and Elijah's journey. Instead of reprimanding Elijah, God showed him grace by sending him on a 40-day journey to Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai, where Moses had once met God. God's gentle treatment allowed Elijah to recover from his crisis without demanding immediate recovery. This compassion reminds us that God understands our limits and recognizes when we need a break. As Psalm 103:14 says, "For he knows how we are formed, he remembers that we are dust." Even when Elijah felt he had reached his limit, God knew he still had much to offer. Elijah and the ravens. One of the most memorable moments in Elijah's life occurred when he was instructed to deliver a prophecy to the wicked king Ahab and Queen Jezebel, foretelling a drought due to their idolatry. This enraged Ahab and left Elijah feeling vulnerable and exhausted. But God provided for him once again, telling him to hide in the Kerith ravine, east of the Jordan, where he would drink from the brook and be fed by ravens. 1 Kings 17:2-4. Elijah obeyed, and the ravens brought him food, illustrating God's provision even in dire circumstances. This period by the brook taught Elijah about solitude and trusting in God's guidance. Even when the situation seems bleak, God's provision and care are always present. Elijah's time of solitude and lessons in trust. Elijah, a formidable prophet whose prayers could bring rain or halt it, was instructed by God to seek solitude despite his soaring popularity. God directed him to the Kerith ravine, a secluded spot, which teaches us a vital lesson about stepping away from the busyness of life to find peace and connect with the divine. The name Kerith comes from a Hebrew root meaning to cut or trim, symbolizing that God intended to remove distractions and refine Elijah during this time. It's not unusual for God to call us away from our hectic lives. He may lead us to quiet places, whether a hospital room, through shattered dreams, or in moments of grief, to find solace away from the world's chaos. Elijah's retreat to Kerith was a divine lesson in trust and dependence on God. During a severe drought, Elijah had to trust that God would keep the brook flowing and that ravens, considered unclean birds, would bring him food. In 1 Kings 17:4-6, God instructs Elijah, "You will drink from the brook, and I have ordered the ravens to feed you there." Elijah followed God's command, staying by the brook as the ravens delivered bread and meat morning and evening, and he drank from the brook. The emphasis on the name Kerith underscores Elijah's obedience and the importance of being where God wants us. Even though ravens could theoretically feed him elsewhere, God specifically chose this location to teach Elijah about intimate communion and trust. This period of solitude was meant to deepen Elijah's faith, showing that divine provision comes in unexpected ways. Elijah learned crucial lessons from this experience. Firstly, God can use unlikely means, like ravens, which were considered unclean, to deliver his blessings. This teaches us that God's goodness isn't limited by the purity of the messengers he uses. Secondly, Elijah realized that spiritual nourishment often comes in surprising forms and that daily faith and trust are essential. Just as God provided manna to the Israelites, the ravens brought Elijah just enough food each day, reinforcing the importance of relying on God for daily needs. The greatest battle of the Old Testament. To fully grasp the drama of Elijah's story, we need to understand the key players. King Ahab of Israel, notorious for his extreme wickedness, and his wife Jezebel, who replaced worship of the Lord with Baal worship, were central to this narrative. Against this backdrop, Elijah emerged as a formidable prophet, confronting Ahab in a showdown that would shape history. 3 years had passed since Elijah had declared a drought, leading to a severe famine in Samaria. In 1 Kings 18:2-16, we see Elijah's dramatic encounter with Ahab. The famine was dire, and Ahab, desperate for a solution, enlisted the help of Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah, a devout believer, had secretly protected and fed 100 of the Lord's prophets, hiding them from Jezebel's purge. Elijah's confrontation with Ahab would set the stage for one of the most significant battles in Old Testament history, showcasing his unwavering faith and courage amidst a time of great turmoil. Elijah and the showdown at Mount Carmel. Amid the drought, King Ahab tasked Obadiah with searching for water sources and grass to save their remaining livestock, hoping to avoid sacrificing any. They split up to cover more ground. Ahab took one direction, and Obadiah went the other. This story highlights Obadiah's bravery, as he risked his life to protect and provide for 100 of the Lord's prophets, hiding them in caves and keeping them fed during a time of intense persecution. During his search, Obadiah encountered Elijah. Recognizing the prophet, he bowed deeply and asked, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" Elijah confirmed his identity and instructed Obadiah to tell Ahab that he was there. Obadiah, frightened, responded, "What have I done to deserve this? Ahab has searched high and low for you. If I go and tell him you're here, and you're not, he'll kill me. Haven't you heard what I've done? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in caves and provided for them while Jezebel was killing others. Now you want me to tell Ahab you're here, and I'll be dead." Elijah reassured him, "As the Lord Almighty lives whom I serve, I will present myself to Ahab today." Trusting Elijah's word, Obadiah went to find Ahab and delivered the message. When Ahab saw Elijah, he accused him angrily. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah calmly responded, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your family have by abandoning the Lord's commands and following Baal." With this bold declaration, Elijah set the stage for an epic showdown. He challenged Ahab to gather all of Israel on Mount Carmel, where he would face off against 850 prophets of Baal and Asherah. Elijah said, "Summon the people of Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Ahab complied, and the stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. Elijah addressed the gathered crowd, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The people remained silent, unable to choose. To prove the true God, Elijah proposed a test. "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Let's each prepare a bull, cut it into pieces, put it on wood, but don't light the fire. Call on your God, and I will call on the Lord. The God who answers by fire is the true God." The people agreed to the test. Elijah instructed the prophets of Baal to go first. They prepared their bull and called on Baal from morning until noon, shouting, "Baal, answer us." But there was no response. They danced around the altar, and as midday approached, Elijah began to mock them. "Shout louder." Maybe he's deep in thought, busy, or traveling. Perhaps he's asleep and needs to be awakened. The prophets of Baal cried louder, and even cut themselves with swords and spears, but their efforts were in vain. As the evening sacrifice time approached, there was still no answer. The spectacle of their futile worship set the stage for Elijah's dramatic demonstration of God's power. Elijah's triumph on Mount Carmel and beyond. With unwavering faith and confidence in God, Elijah summoned the people to gather around him. He took charge, repairing the altar of the Lord that had been in ruins. Using 12 stones, one for each of Israel's tribes, he rebuilt the altar and prepared it for the demonstration of God's power. Elijah dug a trench around the altar, arranged the wood, and cut the bull into pieces, laying it on the wood. To make the miracle even more astounding, Elijah instructed the people to pour 4 large jars of water over the offering and wood, doing so 3 times until the trench was filled. As the time for sacrifice approached, Elijah prayed earnestly, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord descended, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. Witnessing this miraculous event, the people fell to their knees and proclaimed, "The Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God." Elijah then ordered the capture of the prophets of Baal, ensuring none escaped. They were taken to the Kishon Valley and executed as per God's law. Following this dramatic victory, Elijah prayed for rain despite the drought. He placed his face between his knees and instructed his servant to look toward the sea. After the servant reported no sign of rain, Elijah told him to check again. On the 7th try, the servant saw a small cloud rising from the sea. Elijah directed him to tell Ahab to prepare his chariot and leave before the rain stopped him. As the sky darkened and heavy rain began to pour, Elijah, empowered by the Lord, outran Ahab's chariot to Jezreel, a distance of nearly 20 miles, 1 Kings 18:42-46. This incredible scene underscores the power of persistent prayer and the importance of trusting in God's timing and provision, even when circumstances seem dire. Elijah, a prophet of resilience and faith. Elijah, a prominent prophet in the 9th century BC, lived during a tumultuous time in Israel's history under King Ahab and his son Ahaziah. Although no book bears his name, the account of his life is a major focus of 1 Kings, illustrating his role during a period of rising idolatry. In a moment of reflection at his humble camp, Elijah felt a divine call to move to Zarephath. Despite the severe drought and his dwindling resources, he trusted God's direction. God instructed him to go to Zarephath in Sidon, a Gentile city where a widow would provide for him. 1 Kings 17:8-9. Elijah's faith was tested as he journeyed to this foreign land. The widow he met was struggling but, guided by divine instruction, cared for Elijah. This period of relocation and reliance on others highlights Elijah's steadfast faith and obedience, showing how God's missions can lead us to unexpected places and require total trust in his provision. Throughout his journey from Jezreel to Cherith and then to Zarephath, Elijah's resilience was fortified. His adventures illustrate that even in the face of adversity, faith and obedience can lead to profound experiences of God's power and provision. A lesson in faith and provision. The widow of Zarephath. In a region where Baal was worshipped without any visible results, God directed Elijah to a rather unexpected place, Zarephath. There, he told Elijah, "I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." 1 Kings 17:9. In ancient times, widows were often among the most vulnerable. They faced extreme poverty and were sometimes forced into desperate situations just to survive. Widows typically wore clothing that signified their lowly status, living in hardship alongside orphans and the destitute. In this context of scarcity and marginalization, Elijah was sent to a Gentile widow, a figure of significant need and low social standing, demonstrating that God's provisions can come through anyone, regardless of their circumstances. When Jesus was rejected by his own people, he used the story of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath to illustrate a profound truth about God's sovereignty. In Luke 4:24-26, Jesus noted, "Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. When Elijah arrived in Zarephath, he found the widow gathering sticks at the city gate. He requested, 'Please bring me a little water in a cup that I may drink.' As she went to get it, he added, 'Please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand.' 1 Kings 17:10-11. The widow, in her dire situation, was preparing for what she feared would be her last meal for herself and her son. She had just a small amount of flour and oil left, barely enough to sustain them. Despite her own dire circumstances, the widow responded to Elijah's request with extraordinary faith. She had no way of knowing that Elijah was sent by God, and yet she chose to trust him, demonstrating an incredible act of generosity and trust in the prophet's promise. Elijah assured her that God would provide abundantly. "For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." 1 Kings 17:14. Her faith was rewarded as the flour and oil miraculously lasted through the famine. This story illustrates that God's provision often comes through acts of faith and obedience, even when resources are scarce. The widow of Zarephath's story teaches us that true faith requires action and trust, especially in challenging circumstances. Her willingness to give what little she had enabled her to receive God's abundant provision and participate in his grand design. This event is a powerful reminder that faith is not merely a belief, but a transformative act of obedience that aligns us with God's greater purpose. Trusting beyond limits. The widow of Zarephath's journey. This story invites us to trust in God and follow his instructions, knowing that he always has a grander plan and unexpected provisions for those who show faith and devotion. The widow of Zarephath, despite her dire situation, expressed deep reverence for the God of Israel, acknowledging that he was Elijah's God, even though she was a Gentile. When Elijah arrived at Zarephath, he found the widow in the midst of preparing what she thought would be her last meal for herself and her son. The situation was dire. She had only a tiny bit of flour and oil left. In 1 Kings 17:13-14, Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." Elijah's request seemed bold and almost reckless. Asking a woman in such poverty for part of her last meal might have seemed like taking advantage of her. But Elijah was delivering a divine promise. God had assured him that the flour and oil would not run out until the end of the drought. Elijah's request was a test of her faith, and her willingness to trust in God's promise was rewarded. In 1 Kings 17:15-16 we learn, "She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family. The jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah." Despite her risk, the widow acted on faith, and her trust in God's promise led to the miraculous provision that sustained them through the famine. But the story takes a somber turn. After experiencing God's miraculous provision, the widow's son fell gravely ill and died. The widow, who had already faced the hardship of losing her husband, now grappled with the unbearable pain of losing her only child. She questioned Elijah, saying, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" In 1 Kings 17:19, Elijah responded, "Give me your son." He took the boy to his room, laid him on his bed, and fervently prayed, "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with, by causing her son to die?" This upper room, a common feature in ancient homes, was where Elijah sought God's intervention with deep sincerity. He stretched himself over the boy 3 times, pleading for the boy's life to return. God heard Elijah's earnest prayer, and the boy was revived. 1 Kings 17:22. Elijah then brought the child back to his mother and declared, "See, your son lives." The widow, seeing the miracle, recognized Elijah's true prophetic authority and the truth of the Lord's word. She declared, "Now I know that you are a man of God and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." 1 Kings 17:23-24. This powerful story not only highlights the importance of trusting God even when circumstances seem bleak, but also shows how faith and obedience can lead to extraordinary divine provision and miracles. The power of faith and the prophet who never died. Elijah's approach to prayer was anything but conventional. By stretching himself out 3 times over the dead boy, Elijah demonstrated a profound faith that went beyond the ritual. It wasn't the specific method of his prayer that mattered, but his unwavering trust in God. This story reminds us that God responds to genuine faith, not just the form of our prayers. God's compassion is always available to those who persistently seek Him. Even when life feels empty and hopeless, divine intervention can bring about genuine change and transformation. Elijah's arrival at the widow's home brought a dramatic turnaround, signaling a new chapter for her family. God's grace can make a way even when none seems visible, showing that despite our limitations or past, we can be used in powerful and surprising ways. This story is a testament to how faith and perseverance can lead to miraculous outcomes. Elijah's trust in God and God's subsequent response remind us that through faith we can experience profound transformation. Elijah, the prophet who defied death. Elijah's journey was as remarkable as it was unique. As a chosen prophet, he underwent rigorous training at Cherith, showed God's power on Mount Carmel, and boldly confronted King Ahab. His faithful service and humility were unparalleled, but what made Elijah's story even more extraordinary was his departure from earth. Unlike most, Elijah did not face death. Instead, he was taken directly to heaven, a rare event in recorded history shared only by Enoch and Elijah. Genesis 5:24 tells us, "Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him away." In contrast, Elijah's ascent is vividly described in 2 Kings 2:11. "Suddenly, while they were walking and talking, a chariot of fire with horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind." This whirlwind, a powerful burst of wind, instantly carried Elijah from earth to God's presence. On his final day, Elijah, accompanied by Elisha, began his journey at Gilgal, a site of deep spiritual significance, where the Israelites first camped in the Promised Land and renewed their covenant. From there, they traveled to Bethel, a place of prayer, and then to the Jordan River, symbolizing passage and transformation. This journey was not just physical but also symbolic of Elijah's life of complete dedication and surrender to God. Despite Elijah's attempts to dissuade Elisha from following him, the young prophet remained steadfast. At each stop, Gilgal, Bethel, and Jericho, Elijah tested Elisha's resolve, but Elisha's commitment never wavered. his unwavering loyalty and determination to stay with Elijah until the end showcase the essence of true discipleship and spiritual mentorship. This dedication highlights the depth of their relationship and the profound impact of following God's call. The value of loyalty and the miraculous moments. We all need an Elisha in our lives, those rare and invaluable friends who stand by us through thick and thin. These loyal companions listen, support, and encourage us, especially when others might criticize. They pray with us and offer their unwavering presence, making us profoundly grateful for their steadfast friendship. The story takes a dramatic turn when Elijah and Elisha arrive at the Jordan River, setting the stage for a miraculous event. In 2 Kings 2:10 we find, 50 men from the company of the prophets also went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah then rolled up his cloak and struck the water with it, causing it to part and allowing them to cross on dry ground. After they crossed, Elijah asked Elisha, "What can I do for you before I'm taken from you?" Elisha boldly requested, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." Elijah was taken aback by this request, but assured Elisha that if he witnessed Elijah's departure, his request would be granted. Determined, Elisha kept his eyes on Elijah. Then the extraordinary happened. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. 2 Kings 2:11. Elijah's ascent in a whirlwind was a breathtaking moment, affirming Elisha's faith and granting him the double portion of Elijah's spirit. This powerful event highlights the importance of asking great things from God and keeping a vision that goes beyond our immediate limitations. Elijah's encounter with Jesus and Moses. One of the most extraordinary moments in the Bible is the transfiguration of Jesus, where his human form was transformed, revealing his divine glory. This event occurred after Jesus had shared his impending suffering and resurrection with his disciples, summarizing the core of the gospel. In Matthew 17:1-2 we read, "After 6 days Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. Jesus' face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white." Peter described the brilliance as surpassing anything bleach could achieve. This light emanated from Jesus, exposing his divine essence. During this transfiguration, Jesus met with Moses and Elijah, discussing his upcoming exodus, his mission to liberate his people, as recorded in Luke 9:31. They appeared in radiant glory, conversing about the fulfillment of Jesus' mission in Jerusalem. This divine radiance was reminiscent of the Shekinah, the cloud of glory representing God's presence in the Old Testament. This event was a glimpse of Jesus' future return, when he will no longer be seen merely as the sacrificial lamb, but as the majestic Lion of Judah. At that time, he will be recognized in all his glory as the Son of God, the King of Kings, and the Lord of Lords. The Transfiguration, a glimpse of divine glory. During the Transfiguration, an extraordinary moment in the Gospels, Moses and Elijah appeared and conversed with Jesus. This incredible scene is captured in Matthew 17:3. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Moses and Elijah, iconic figures from the Old Testament, symbolize different aspects of God's revelation, Moses representing the law and Elijah the prophets. Their presence underscores that those who have passed away, like Moses, remain in God's presence and continue to communicate. Meanwhile, Elijah's appearance represents those who, like him, are taken up by God without experiencing death. Together, Moses and Elijah embody the Old Testament, while Jesus represents the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets, bridging the Old and New Testaments in this divine encounter. Peter's reaction to this miraculous event reflects his awe and confusion. In Matthew 17:4-5, Peter says, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." As he spoke, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud declared, "This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The disciples, overwhelmed and terrified, fell face down. Peter's offer to build shelters showed his desire to honor the great figures before him, but he didn't fully grasp the gravity of the moment. God's voice interrupted, affirming Jesus as his beloved Son and instructing them to listen to him. When the disciples looked up, they saw only Jesus. In Matthew 17:7-8, Jesus touched them and said, "Get up, don't be afraid." The disciples' fear subsided, and they saw that Jesus was the central figure of this divine revelation. This moment underscored that while Moses and Elijah pointed to Jesus, he transcends both. All scriptures ultimately point to him, as noted in Luke 24:27, where Jesus explains to his followers, "And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself." As they descended the mountain, Jesus instructed them to keep the vision a secret until after his resurrection. In Matthew 17:9 he says, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Jesus knew that revealing this event prematurely would create confusion and might lead people to force his kingship before the right time. His resurrection would be the pivotal event confirming his kingship and the invitation to faith in him. The disciples, puzzled about Elijah's role, asked Jesus, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus clarified in Matthew 17:12-13, "Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Jesus was referring to John the Baptist, who came in the spirit and power of Elijah, but was not recognized as such by the religious leaders, Luke 1:17. While Moses was a foundational leader for the Jews, Jesus is revealed as even greater. Moses, who transitioned from an Egyptian prince to a shepherd and then a leader of Israel, was a significant figure. Yet, in the Transfiguration, he and Elijah appear with Jesus to highlight his superior role. Moses and Elijah represent the law and the prophets, respectively, while Jesus fulfills and surpasses both. The Transfiguration reaffirms Jesus as the divine Son of God, confirming his central role in God's plan of salvation. The Transfiguration and the prophetic witnesses. The Transfiguration was a breathtaking moment when Jesus revealed his divine glory to his closest disciples. On that holy mountain, Moses and Elijah appeared alongside Jesus, underscoring his fulfillment of both the law and the prophets. The voice of God the Father confirmed this divine truth, proclaiming, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Matthew 17:5. This powerful affirmation highlighted Jesus' supreme role and reassured the disciples of his divine authority and mission. In the book of Revelation, 2 prominent prophetic figures appear during a time of great tribulation. Described in Revelation 11:3-5, these 2 witnesses are endowed with remarkable powers and a mission of immense importance. "And I will give power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anyone wants to harm them, fire proceeds from their mouth and devours their enemies. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this manner." Their prophetic role and their protection from harm echo the divine safeguarding granted to Elijah in earlier times. These witnesses will carry out their ministry with extraordinary authority, performing miracles such as stopping the rain, turning water into blood and bringing plagues upon the earth, acts reminiscent of those performed by Moses and Elijah. However, their mission will not be without peril. In Revelation 11:7-10, we learn that after completing their testimony, they will face opposition from a beast emerging from the abyss. This beast will defeat and kill them, leaving their bodies exposed in the streets of a city symbolically called Sodom and Egypt. The world's reaction will be one of dark celebration, reveling in the demise of these tormentors. Yet, the joy of the wicked will be fleeting. Revelation 11:11-12 describes a dramatic turn of events. After 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet. Great fear fell on those who saw them. They heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here," and they ascended to heaven in a cloud while their enemies watched. Their resurrection and ascension will instill terror in those who witnessed it, showcasing God's ultimate power and judgment. This miraculous event will serve as a stark reminder of God's authority and the unworthiness of the earth's wickedness to hold such divine witnesses. The Transfiguration and the account of the two witnesses vividly illustrate the intersection of divine glory and prophetic mission. They reveal how God's presence and power transcend earthly constraints, affirming Jesus' supreme role and demonstrating his ongoing influence through the ages. The mystery of the two witnesses. Exploring theories. The identity of the two witnesses mentioned in Revelation has sparked much debate and speculation. Here are 3 leading theories. 1. Moses and Elijah. The first theory posits that the two witnesses are Moses and Elijah. This idea is supported by the miracles described in Revelation that echo the powerful acts performed by these two Old Testament figures. Moses, known for his numerous miracles, including turning water into blood, fits the description of the witnesses' abilities. Elijah, similarly, performed extraordinary miracles, like stopping rain, which aligns with the witnesses' powers. Their appearance with Jesus during the Transfiguration further bolsters this view. Additionally, Jewish tradition anticipates the return of these two great figures based on prophecies in Malachi 4:5 and Deuteronomy 18:15, which predict the coming of Elijah and a prophet like Moses. 2. Enoch and Elijah. Another theory suggests that Enoch and Elijah are the two witnesses. This theory is grounded in the unique circumstances of their departures from earth. According to Hebrews 11:5, Enoch was taken to heaven without experiencing death. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. Similarly, Elijah was taken up in a whirlwind, 2 Kings 2:11. Proponents of this theory argue that since these two did not die, they might return to fulfill their roles as witnesses during the tribulation. However, Hebrews 9:27, which states that everyone is destined to die once, is seen by some as a general principle rather than a rigid rule. Exceptions to this principle, such as Lazarus' resurrection, suggest that the theory isn't definitively proven by this verse alone. Moreover, the rapture described in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 indicates that not all believers will experience death before being taken to heaven.